Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Seoul's most prestigious private hospital, each drop sounding like a whispered accusation against the silence within. On the 47th floor, in a VIP suite that cost more per night than most Koreans earned in a month, machines beeped their monotonous rhythm beside a bed where one of the nation's most feared men lay utterly still. Seo Do-jin had not opened his eyes in 91 days. His empire was crumbling. His enemies were celebrating. His doctors had stopped believing in miracles. The board members who once trembled at his name now held secret meetings to divide his fortune. Everyone had given up. Everyone had moved on. Everyone had stopped looking. Then an 8-year-old African boy accidentally walked into the wrong hospital room. Within seconds he noticed one tiny detail no doctor, detective, or family member had seen in 3 months. And everything, absolutely everything, changed. Before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin. The morning Seo Do-jin's world ended began like any other Tuesday in March. His convoy of 3 black armored vehicles cut through Seoul's Gangnam district with surgical precision, the lead car clearing traffic while his personal vehicle maintained exactly 3 car lengths behind. Han Woo-suk sat in the passenger seat, his former special forces training evident in the way his eyes never stopped scanning the streets, the rooftops, the spaces between buildings where threats could hide. The board meeting is scheduled for 9, Woo-suk said without turning. Director Jang requested a private audience afterward. In the back seat, Seo Do-jin didn't respond immediately. He studied the Seoul skyline through tinted windows, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the morning light. At 38 years old, he had built an empire that operated in the spaces between legitimate business and necessary darkness. His investment company controlled billions in international assets. His underground organization controlled something far more valuable, fear itself. What does Jang want? Do-jin's voice was low, measured, the kind of voice that made men confess secrets they'd sworn to take to their graves. He didn't say. But he's been meeting with the Busan families. Frequently. Do-jin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jang Myung-soo had been an ally once, years ago, when they were both hungry young men fighting for scraps in an unforgiving world. But ambition had a way of transforming allies into enemies, and Do-jin had noticed the change in Jang's eyes lately, the way they lingered too long, calculated too openly. Have him followed. Already done. The convoy turned onto Olympic Darrow, the Han River glittering silver to their left. Traffic was lighter than usual, which should have been the first warning. The second warning was the construction truck that appeared from a side street, moving too fast, angled too precisely. Woo-suk saw it first. Contact left. The explosion swallowed his words. The lead vehicle disappeared in a ball of fire and twisted metal. The rear car swerved, catching the edge of the blast, flipping twice before crashing through the guardrail toward the river. Do-jin's car took the shockwave head-on, armored plating buckling inward as the driver lost control. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The world became a spinning kaleidoscope of violence. When the vehicle finally stopped moving, Do-jin found himself hanging sideways, seatbelt cutting into his chest, blood dripping from somewhere above his left eye. Through the cracked window, he could see figures approaching. Not rescuers, not police, but men in dark clothing moving with military precision. Woo-suk was unconscious in the front seat, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. Do-jin reached for the gun concealed beneath his suit jacket, but his arm wouldn't cooperate. Something was wrong with his shoulder, his ribs, his entire left side. Pain radiated through him in waves so intense his vision began to tunnel. The door was wrenched open. A face appeared, familiar somehow, though Do-jin's damaged mind couldn't place it. The man smiled, cold and satisfied, like a chess player who had finally cornered his opponent's king. The great Seo Do-jin, the man whispered. How does it feel to be helpless? Something struck the back of Do-jin's head. And then there was nothing but darkness. 3 months later, the VIP suite on the 47th floor had become a shrine to a man everyone believed was already dead. Fresh flowers appeared every morning, arranged by a housekeeper named Mrs. Park who had worked for the Seo family for 30 years. She would straighten his blankets, adjust the pillows no one needed adjusted, and speak to him in soft Korean about the weather, the cherry blossoms that had bloomed and fallen in his absence, the way the city missed his presence even if it would never admit it. The board is meeting again today, she said, smoothing a crease in the Egyptian cotton sheets. They think you can't hear them whispering in the hallways. But I know better, young master. I've known you since you were a boy with too much pride and not enough patience. You're still in there. I can feel it. The machines beeped their response. The ventilators sighed. Doojin's face remained perfectly, terribly still. Dr. Kang Hai-rin entered the room with a tablet in her hands, her white coat pristine, her expression professionally neutral. At 45, she was one of the most respected neurosurgeons in Asia, and this case had become her obsession, not because of the patient's wealth or power, but because nothing about it made medical sense. Any change? Mrs. Park asked, the same question she asked every morning, the same hope she refused to abandon. Dr. Kang studied the monitors. His brain activity shows patterns I've never seen before. It's like he's choosing not to wake up. He's not in a traditional coma. It's more like... She paused, searching for words. Choosing? The trauma should have killed him. The fact that it didn't suggest a will to survive, that's almost unprecedented. But something is keeping him under. Whether it's physical or psychological, I can't determine. Mrs. Park touched Doojin's hand gently. He's always been stubborn. Even as a child, he would refuse to cry no matter how badly he was hurt. He thought showing pain was showing weakness. That stubbornness might be what's keeping him alive, Dr. Kang admitted. But it might also be what's preventing recovery. If he can't let go of whatever he's holding on to? She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. In the hallway outside, two men in expensive suits spoke in hushed voices, their words carrying through the slightly open door. The quarterly reports are a disaster. Without his signature authority, we can't access the emergency funds. Then we need to move forward with the succession plan. You mean the takeover plan? A soft laugh. Call it what you want. The man is gone. The empire remains. And empires need rulers. Mrs. Park's hands tightened on the blanket, her gentle face hardening with an anger she rarely showed. These vultures had been circling for weeks, growing bolder as each day passed without change. They had no loyalty, no honor, no understanding of what Doojin had built or why it mattered. But she couldn't stop them. She was just a housekeeper. Just an old woman who remembered a serious little boy with steel-gray eyes and a heart he protected so fiercely that most people forgot it existed. She leaned close to Doojin's ear. Wake up, young master. Please. They're coming for everything you've built. Everything you've protected. Wake up before it's too late. The machines continued their rhythmic song. Doojin's eyes remained closed. And in the shadows of Seoul's underworld, Jang Myung-soo smiled as he signed papers that would transfer controlling interest in Seo Doojin's empire to accounts the comatose Seo would never trace, assuming he ever woke at all. Zainab Adeyemi had not planned to be in Seoul. 6 months ago, she had been working in Lagos, translating for international medical conferences, building a quiet life that kept her close to family and far from complication. Then the opportunity had come. A 2-year position with a humanitarian medical organization that operated throughout East Asia. Better pay. Better resources. Better chance to make a real difference. Her mother had worried, of course. Nigerian mothers always worried about daughters who traveled too far, who lived alone in foreign cities, who approached 30 without husbands or children. But Mama had also taught her that helping others was its own kind of family, and so she had blessed Zainab's journey with prayers and tears and 3 suitcases full of food that wouldn't survive customs. Now Zainab walked through the corridors of Seoul Medical Center, her badge identifying her as a senior interpreter for the International Health Alliance. Her natural black curls were pulled back from her face, and she wore an elegant earth-tone dress that managed to look professional while still reflecting who she was. A woman who had learned to move through powerful spaces without losing herself. "Auntie, can we go see the playroom first?" The voice belonged to Tund, her 8-year-old nephew who had come to Seoul for the summer while his parents sorted through what the family delicately called difficulties. The boy walked beside her, his worn sketchbook clutched against his chest, his small round glasses slightly askew. "After our meeting," Zainab said, adjusting the glasses with practiced ease. "Dr. Kim wants to discuss the new translation protocols, and then we can explore." Tund nodded seriously. He was always serious, this child. Observant in ways that sometimes unnerved adults, asking questions that exposed truths people preferred to keep hidden. His teachers in Lagos had called him too curious for his own good. Zainab preferred to think of him as exactly curious enough. The meeting took longer than expected, as meetings always did, and by the time Zainab finished reviewing documents and discussing linguistic nuances and medical terminology, it was nearly noon. "Now can we explore?" Tund asked. "Now we can explore." The hospital was vast, a labyrinth of corridors and elevators and specialized wings that served everyone from accident victims to the obscenely wealthy. Tund wanted to see everything: The emergency room where doctors rushed to save lives, the pediatric ward with its colorful murals, the strange machines that hummed and clicked behind closed doors. They had just finished visiting the children's art therapy room when Tun spotted something that made him stop. "Auntie, what's on that floor?" He was pointing at an elevator marked, VIP access, authorized personnel only. "That's where very important patients stay," Zainab explained. "Rich people, politicians, celebrities. They have private suites instead of regular rooms." "Why?" "Because they can afford it. And because they want privacy." Tund considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "Are their diseases different from regular people's diseases?" "No, Tund. Disease doesn't care how much money you have." "Then why do they need different rooms?" It was a good question, the kind of question that made Zainab both proud and nervous. "That's just how the world works, dear one." Tund didn't seem satisfied with this answer, but before he could ask another question, Zainab's phone buzzed with an urgent message from her supervisor. A patient on the 7th floor needed emergency translation. A Nigerian businessman who had collapsed during a conference and couldn't communicate with his doctors. "Stay right here," she told Tund, pointing to a bench in the hallway. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Don't move." "I won't. I mean it, Tund. Don't move." "I know, Auntie." She hurried toward the elevator, her mind already shifting to the task ahead. Behind her, Tund sat obediently on the bench, his sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the city skyline he could see through the corridor windows. For exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds he didn't move. Then a nurse rushed past, her arms full of supplies, and bumped into a cart that sent a tray clattering to the floor. The noise was startling and Tund instinctively jumped up to help. His mother had raised him to be helpful always, no matter the circumstances. By the time he had gathered the scattered items and handed them to the flustered nurse, he realized he had no idea which way his aunt had gone. The hallway looked the same in every direction. He started walking, searching for something familiar, but the corridors seemed to multiply and shift. He passed doors marked with numbers and names he didn't recognize, elevators that looked identical to every other elevator, signs written in Korean characters he was still learning to read. Then he saw it, a door that was slightly open, leading into a room filled with soft light. Tund approached carefully, peering through the gap. Inside, he saw monitors and machines, fresh flowers and crystal vases, and a man lying perfectly still in a hospital bed. The man was tall, Tund could tell even though he was lying down, with jet black hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. There was something almost regal about him, something that made Tund think of the kings in the stories his grandmother used to tell. But there was something else too. Something that made Tund push the door open wider and step inside, his heart suddenly beating faster. The man's hand was moving. Not much. Not obviously. Just the slightest tremor in his fingers, barely visible against the white sheets. But Tund's eyes were sharp, trained by years of drawing to notice details others missed, and he was certain of what he was seeing. He moved closer, his sketchbook forgotten in his hand. The man's fingers were tapping. Slowly. Deliberately. A pattern that repeated over and over. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. Tund frowned, watching intently. He had learned Morse code from a book his father had given him last year, a children's guide to communication that had consumed his attention for months. The pattern wasn't quite Morse code, but it was something. Something intentional. Something that meant the man wasn't really asleep at all. He was trying to communicate. "Hello?" Tund whispered. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyes remained closed, but his fingers tapped faster. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. "You're awake," Tund breathed. "You're awake, but you can't open your eyes. You can't talk. But you can hear everything." For a long moment nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the man's head moved. A fractional nod. So small that anyone not watching closely would have missed it entirely. Tund's eyes went wide. He understood something then, something that would change multiple lives forever. This man, whoever he was, had been lying here for a very long time, surrounded by people who had given up on him, and no one had noticed that he was still there. Still aware. Still fighting. "I'm going to get help," Tund whispered. "I'm going to tell them you're awake. Don't worry. I'll make them believe me." He turned and ran for the door, his sketchbook clutched tight against his chest, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could go. Behind him, Seo Doojin's fingers continued their desperate rhythm, tapping a message he had been trying to send for 91 days. Someone had finally heard him. The nurse's station on the 47th floor was staffed by 3 women who had been trained to handle VIP patients with discretion and efficiency. They did not handle small African children who appeared from nowhere, breathless and demanding attention. You have to come. Tund insisted, tugging at the sleeve of the nearest nurse. The man in that room is awake. He's tapping with his fingers. He's trying to tell you something. The nurse, a young woman named Jiyeon who had been on shift for 12 hours, looked down at the boy with exhausted patience. What room are you talking about? The one with all the flowers. The tall man with black hair. He's been tapping and no one notices. Jiyeon's expression shifted. You mean Mr. Seo's room? How did you get in there? That floor requires authorization. The door was open, Tund said. Please, you have to listen to me. He's awake. He's trying to communicate. Another nurse looked up from her computer, her tone dismissive. Sweetheart, Mr. Seo has been in a coma for 3 months. Multiple specialists have examined him. He's not communicating anything. But I saw it. His fingers were moving in a pattern. Like a code. Sometimes coma patients have involuntary muscle movements, Jiyeon explained gently. It doesn't mean. It wasn't involuntary. Tund's voice rose with frustration. He was doing it on purpose. When I talked to him, he nodded. I know the difference between a mistake and someone trying to talk. The nurses exchanged glances, the kind of glance adults shared when they wanted to dismiss a child without being cruel. It was a look Tund knew well, and it made his chest burn with familiar anger. Before he could argue further, Zainab appeared at the end of the hallway, her face tight with worry. Tund? She rushed toward him, kneeling to meet his eyes. I've been looking everywhere for you. I told you not to move. I'm sorry, Auntie, but you have to listen. There's a man in that room and he's awake, but no one believes me because they think I'm just a child who doesn't understand, but I do understand. I know what I saw, and he's trapped in there waiting for someone to notice. Slow down. Zainab's hands rested on his shoulders. Breathe. What man? What room? Jiyeon stepped forward, professional concern replacing her earlier dismissiveness. Your son wandered into a restricted area. A very high-profile patient's room. We'll need to document. He's my nephew, Zainab said, and I apologize for any disruption. Tund, we need to go. But Auntie. Now. The word was firm but not unkind, and Tund recognized the tone. It meant she was worried, embarrassed, trying to smooth over a situation. It meant she wasn't going to listen, not yet. But as she guided him toward the elevator, he looked back at the closed door of room 4701 and made a silent promise. He would find a way to prove what he had seen. And he would make them listen. In his private office on the 88th floor of Seo Tower, Jang Myung-soo reviewed the latest medical reports with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were finally coming together. 3 months. 91 days of silence from the great Seo Doojin. 91 days of watching the empire that should have been his slowly dissolve into chaos. An opportunity. The accident had been expensive to arrange, bribing the construction crew, securing the ex-military operatives, ensuring the blast was powerful enough to incapacitate but not quite kill. Death would have been cleaner, but death invited investigations. A tragic accident that left the CEO in a permanent vegetative state? That was a slow suffocation of power, a gradual transfer of control that no one could trace. He ran a hand through his silver-black hair, then pulled on his black leather gloves, a habit from his youth, when the fingerprints of an ambitious young man could be evidence of crimes better left unremembered. The transfer documents are ready, said his assistant, a nervous young man who had learned not to ask questions. Once signed, you'll control 63% of the investment company's shares. And the underground operations? The Busan families have agreed to your terms. The Seoul lieutenants are waiting to see which way the wind blows, but with Doojin incapacitated, they'll fall in line. Jang smiled coldly. They always do. He gazed out at the Seoul skyline, watching the city pulse with life and money and power. He had spent 20 years working toward this moment, 20 years of being second best, second in command, second place. Doojin had always been faster, smarter, more ruthless. Doojin had always won. Until now. His phone buzzed with an alert from his contact at the hospital, a security supervisor whose loyalty had been purchased for a very reasonable price. Incident report. Unauthorized individual accessed room 4701. Child approximately 8 years old. Accompanied by adult female ID badge, Adeyemi Zainab. International Health Alliance. Jang read the message twice, his smile fading. A child had entered Doojin's room. Probably nothing. Children wandered. Hospitals were confusing. No reason to be concerned. But Jang Myung-soo had not survived this long by ignoring potential threats. no matter how small. He typed a response to his contact. Monitor them. I want to know who they are, where they go, and what they saw. Then he returned to his documents, his gloved hands steady, his cold smile restored. Nothing would interfere with his plans. Nothing. That night, in the small apartment she rented in Seoul's Mapo district, Zainab watched her nephew draw. His sketchbook was open on the kitchen table, pencil moving in confident strokes across the page. He had been quiet since they left the hospital, which worried her. Tund was rarely quiet when something was bothering him. Do you want to tell me what happened today? She asked gently, setting a plate of jollof rice in front of him. Tund's pencil paused. You won't believe me. I always believe you. You believe I saw something. You don't believe what I saw. The distinction was painfully accurate, and Zainab felt a flash of shame. She sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. Tell me again. I'll listen properly this time. Tund set down his pencil and looked at her with eyes far too serious for 8 years old. The man in that room was tapping his fingers in a pattern. It was deliberate, Auntie. Not random. When I spoke to him, the pattern changed. When I said I would get help, he nodded. It was tiny, I almost missed it, but it was real. And the nurses said. The nurses said coma patients have involuntary movements. I know that. But this wasn't involuntary. It had meaning. Zainab studied her nephew's face. He was not prone to exaggeration or fantasy. If anything, his imagination ran toward the practical. Puzzles, codes, systems that could be understood and solved. He had never invented stories or made up invisible friends. When he said he saw something, he saw something. The man in that room, she said slowly, is very important. Very powerful. He's been unconscious for 3 months and many specialists have examined him. Maybe they weren't looking for the right thing. What do you mean? Tund picked up his pencil again, sketching lines that began to form a shape. You know how Papa used to say that most people see with their eyes but not with their attention? They look at the big picture and miss the small details. Doctors look for brain scans and reflexes and measurable things. But what if the man was communicating in a way they weren't measuring? Zainab leaned forward, studying the drawing taking shape on the page. It was a hand, long fingers, strong bones, the hint of dark ink across the knuckles. What are those? She pointed to the letters Tund was sketching. I'm not sure. I only saw his hands for a few seconds. But there were words tattooed on his fingers. OL on one hand. Thar on the other. Auntie. He looked up at her. What kind of person has words like that on their hands? Zainab felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She had heard stories, whispers at diplomatic events, warnings from colleagues who worked with international business clients. Korea's corporate world was not as clean as it appeared. Beneath the glass towers and designer suits, there were men who operated by different rules. Men whose power extended into shadows no ordinary person could see. Tund, I want you to promise me something. What? Don't go back to that room. Don't talk about what you saw, not to anyone. If you're right about what you observed, then the people around that man might be very dangerous. Tund's jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of his father. But if he's awake and no one knows, then he's trapped. Someone should help him. Sometimes helping requires waiting for the right moment. Can you do that? Wait until we understand more. He didn't answer immediately, which meant he was genuinely considering the request rather than offering false agreement. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. I'll wait. But I'm not going to forget. I know you won't, dear one. I know. That night, long after Tund had fallen asleep with his sketchbook beside his pillow, Zainab sat by the window and watched the Seoul skyline glitter like a field of cold stars. Her phone displayed search results she had been studying for the past 2 hours. Seo Doo-jin, CEO of Seo Global Investments. Victim of a tragic accident 3 months ago. Currently receiving care at Seoul Medical Center. Prognosis, uncertain. But beneath the official news articles she found other references, forum posts, rumor sites, carefully anonymized discussions that hinted at a different story. A man who controlled more than investments. An organization that operated in the gaps between law and justice. A power struggle that had been simmering for years. And a rival named Jang Myung-soo whose fortunes had risen dramatically since the accident. Zainab was not a detective. She was not a spy. She was an interpreter. A woman who made her living understanding the spaces between languages, the meanings hidden beneath words. And everything she was reading suggested that the truth about Seo Doo-jin's condition was not what the public believed. Maybe Tund had seen exactly what he claimed. Maybe someone powerful wanted to keep the CEO silent. Not dead, but quiet, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond, while enemies divided his empire. She closed her browser and made a decision. Tomorrow she would find a way back into that room. And she would see for herself. Dr. Kang Hai-rin had been a neurosurgeon for 22 years, and she had learned to trust her instincts even when the data contradicted them. Something was wrong with the Seo Do-jin case. The brain scans showed consistent patterns of deep coma, no response to external stimuli, no indication of conscious awareness. But the scans couldn't explain why his heart rate occasionally spiked during conversations happening nearby. They couldn't explain why his cortisol levels fluctuated in patterns that suggested emotional response. They couldn't explain why, every few days, the monitors registered micro-expressions in his facial muscles, tiny movements that lasted milliseconds and could easily be dismissed as equipment errors. She had mentioned these observations to the consulting physicians. They had shrugged, offered technical explanations, suggested she was looking for patterns in random noise. After all, the man's brain showed no signs of recovery. Why waste resources chasing ghosts? But Dr. Kang couldn't let it go. Now she stood in room 4701, watching the sunrise paint golden stripes across her patient's motionless face, and she felt that familiar tug of doubt. "What are you hiding from us?" she murmured. "What are you trying to say?" The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Do-jin's fingers twitched once, twice, then lay still. Dr. Kang's breath caught. She had seen that movement before, had dismissed it like everyone else as involuntary muscular activity. But for just a moment, it had seemed intentional, purposeful. Before she could analyze further, her pager buzzed with an emergency call from the ER. A multi-car accident, multiple trauma cases, all hands needed immediately. She cast one final look at her enigmatic patient. "I'll be back. And I'm going to figure out what's happening in that mind of yours, one way or another." As she left the room, she nearly collided with a woman entering from the opposite direction, a striking figure with rich brown skin and natural black curls, wearing an ID badge that identified her as an interpreter for the International Health Alliance. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman said in perfectly accented Korean. "I was looking for Dr. Kim's office." "You're on the wrong floor. Dr. Kim is on 45. "Of course. My mistake." Dr. Kang nodded and continued toward the elevator, her mind already shifting to the emergencies awaiting her attention. She didn't notice the woman linger at the door of room 4701. She didn't see her slip inside. Zainab had exactly 12 minutes before her absence would be noticed at the translation review session she was supposed to be attending. 12 minutes to confirm what her nephew had claimed. The room was quiet except for the soft symphony of machines, and the man in the bed looked exactly as Tund had described. Tall, strong-featured, dark-haired, with hands that bore faded tattoos across the knuckles. She couldn't read the words from this angle, but she could see the ink beneath his pale skin. He lay perfectly still, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Zainab moved closer, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "Mr. Seo," she said quietly. "My name is Zainab Adeyemi. Yesterday my nephew came into your room by accident. He said you were trying to communicate. He said you tapped your fingers in a pattern when he spoke to you. Nothing happened." The monitors maintained their steady rhythm. Zainab continued, keeping her voice calm and clear. "If you can hear me, I want you to know that you're not alone. I believe Tun saw something real. And if you're trapped in there, if you're aware but can't respond, I want to help you." Silence. She waited, watching his hands intently. 1 minute passed. Nothing. Zainab felt her confidence waver. Perhaps Tund had been mistaken after all. Perhaps the movement had been random, meaningless, and she was risking her professional reputation for a child's fantasy. She turned toward the door. Behind her, something tapped. Soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. Tap, 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 tap. Zainab spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Seo Do-jin's right hand lay against the mattress, his fingers moving in a clear, deliberate pattern. His face remained expressionless, his eyes closed, but those fingers, those tattooed, powerful fingers, were speaking a language that didn't require words. She approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the movement. Tap tap. Tap. Tap 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 tap. "You're trying to tell me something," she breathed. "But I don't understand the code. I need you to help me." The tapping paused. Then, with what seemed like enormous effort, Do-jin's index finger moved differently, tracing a shape against the white sheets. A shape that looked like a letter. Then another. Then another. Then another. Zainab's hands flew to her mouth. Oh, he was spelling out words. Slowly, painfully but unmistakably. "Help," she whispered. "You need help. You're awake and you've been trying to tell everyone for 3 months and no one understood." The tapping stopped. For a moment nothing happened. Then with visible effort the muscles around Doojin's eyes twitched. His eyelids flickered, not opening not quite but straining against whatever force held them closed. A single tear slid from beneath his right eyelid, tracking down his temple into his dark hair. He could hear her. He could understand her. And he had been trapped in his own body, alone and silent, while his enemies destroyed everything he had built. "I'm going to help you," Zainab said, her voice steady despite the tears now streaming down her own face. "I don't know how yet, but I promise on my mother's name, I'm not going to leave you here alone." Doojin's fingers tapped once more. A single word painstakingly spelled. "Dengyar." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Zainab quickly stepped back, smoothing her face into neutral professionalism as the door swung open. A man entered, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive navy suit and black leather gloves. "Ah," he said, his smile cold and polished. "You must be lost. This is a private room. I apologize. I was looking for Dr. Kim and took a wrong turn." Zainab kept her voice light, her expression innocent. "The hallways all look the same." "Indeed they do." The man's eyes lingered on her face, her badge, her hands. "I don't believe I caught your name." "Zainab Adeyemi. I'm an interpreter with the International Health Alliance." "How interesting. Nigeria?" "Yes. A long way from home." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Perhaps I can help you find your destination." It wasn't a question. Zainab walked past him, acutely aware of his gaze following her every movement. In the bed behind her, Seo Doojin lay motionless once more, his fingers still against the sheets, his face betraying nothing. But she had seen the tear. She had understood the message. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the man who had just interrupted them was not a friend. Han Woo-suk had been keeping vigil outside room 4701 for 91 days. He slept in shifts, ate meals at his station, refused to return to his own apartment even when exhaustion made his vision blur. The scar above his left eyebrow, earned in the same accident that had put Doojin in that bed, served as a constant reminder of his failure. He had been unconscious when they loaded Doojin into the ambulance. By the time he woke in a different hospital room, 3 days had passed and his friend was beyond reach. Now he sat in his usual chair, reviewing security footage on a tablet, when the elevator doors opened and Jang Myung-soo stepped out. The two men regarded each other with the careful neutrality of enemies who could not yet afford open warfare. "Director Jang." Woo-suk didn't stand. "I wasn't aware you were visiting today. I wasn't aware I needed your permission." Jang's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Has there been any change in his condition?" "You would know if there had been. The medical reports are distributed to all board members. Reports can be incomplete." Jang glanced toward the closed door of 4701. "I understand there was an incident yesterday. An unauthorized visitor." Woo-suk's expression remained perfectly neutral, but his mind began cataloging exits, weapons, potential threats. A child wandered in by mistake. Security handled it appropriately. A child. How curious. Jang's gloved fingers tapped against his thigh. Children often notice things adults overlook. Did this particular child notice anything interesting? He noticed a patient in a coma. The same thing everyone notices. Of course. Of course. Jang began walking toward the elevator, then paused. "Oh, and Woo-suk? I noticed an interpreter from some humanitarian organization lingering near this floor today. Nigerian woman. Zainab Adeyemi, I believe. You might want to review her access credentials. We wouldn't want any unauthorized observations reaching the wrong ears." The elevator doors closed behind him. Woo-suk waited until he was certain Jang was gone, then pulled out his phone and began making calls. If Jang was interested in the Nigerian interpreter, then the Nigerian interpreter had become important. And if she had seen something in that room, something that made her worth watching, then Woo-suk needed to find her before Jang did. 3 days passed. Zainab attended meetings, completed translations, maintained her professional routine with the careful precision of someone who understood that powerful eyes were watching. Each night, she and Tun sat together, analyzing what they knew. "His fingers spelled out help and danger," she said, showing Tun her notes. "He's aware. He's responsive. But he's trapped, either medically or—" She hesitated. "Or on purpose," Tun finished. Someone wants him to stay asleep. Zainab nodded slowly. The man who interrupted us. He knew things he shouldn't have known. My name, my badge, where I was from. Someone told him I was there. So there's a traitor in the hospital? Maybe. Or maybe someone has informants watching the VIP floor. Tun studied his sketchbook where he had been drawing from memory, the layout of room 4701, the position of the machines, the pattern of the man's finger taps. The pattern he used, Tun said slowly. I've been thinking about it. It wasn't random. It was almost like Morse code but not quite. Like he was trying to use something similar but couldn't remember it perfectly. What do you mean? Papa said that when the brain is hurt, sometimes it mixes things up. Old memories get tangled with new ones. Maybe he learned Morse code a long time ago but the accident scrambled it. So he's doing something similar, close enough to communicate but not exact. Zainab stared at her nephew with the same awe she often felt in his presence. 8 years old, and his mind worked in ways that most adults would never match. Can you decode it? Tun pulled out another sheet of paper, covered in symbols and notes. I've been trying. If I compare his taps to standard Morse and adjust for possible errors. He pointed at a sequence. This might be a name. Jang. Jang? I think so. He might be trying to tell us who hurt him. The implication settled over them like a cold wind. If Seo Doo-jin was trying to identify his attacker, and if that attacker was someone powerful enough to orchestrate a cover-up lasting 3 months, then Tun's innocent discovery had made them both targets. We need to tell someone, Zainab said. The doctors. The police. The man in the fancy suit was at the hospital, Tun pointed out. He knew who you were. If he has people inside the hospital and inside the police, then we can't trust anyone. Except maybe one person. Zainab looked at him. Who? The man with the scar. The one who sits outside the room all day. He looks at Mr. Seo the way Papa looks at photos of Grandma, like he would do anything to bring him back. If anyone can be trusted, it's someone who loves him. Once again, Zainab found herself humbled by her nephew's perception. How do you see these things? She murmured. Tun shrugged. I just look. Most people don't. The next morning, Zainab found Han Woo-suk exactly where Tun had described, sitting in a chair outside room 4701, his posture alert despite the exhaustion visible in his face. Mr. Han? He looked up, his dark eyes immediately registering recognition. Ms. Adeyemi. I was wondering when you would approach me. She hadn't expected that. You know who I am? Director Jang mentioned you. Which means you're either a threat to be eliminated or an ally to be cultivated. Given that you returned to this floor despite obvious risk, I'm guessing you're not working for him. No, I'm not. Woo-suk studied her for a long moment, his soldier's instincts reading her body language, her sincerity, her fear. You saw something, he said finally. In his room. Something that made you come back. Zainab glanced around the hallway. No one was nearby but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Woo-suk stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the polished floor. Follow me. And Ms. Adeyemi? If you're lying, if you're here to harm him in any way, understand that I will end you myself. No hesitation. No mercy. It should have been threatening. It should have made her run. Instead it made her trust him. Because that kind of devotion couldn't be faked. They talked for 2 hours in a maintenance room that Woo-suk had swept for recording devices just that morning. Zainab told him everything. Tun's accidental discovery, the finger patterns, the words spelled against the sheets, the tear that had slid from a supposedly comatose man's eye. She showed him Tun's notes, the analysis of the tapping patterns, the name that seemed to emerge from the coded communication. Jang. Woo-suk listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each revelation. I've suspected for weeks, he said when she finished. The accident was too convenient. The investigation closed too quickly. And Jang's sudden rise to power while Doo-jin lies helpless. He shook his head. But I had no proof. No evidence that Doo-jin was aware enough to provide it. Now you do. My nephew saw it. I saw it. With respect, Ms. Adeyemi, the testimony of a child and a foreign interpreter won't be enough to move against someone as powerful as Jang Myung-soo. We need more. We need Doo-jin himself to confirm it. How? He can barely move his fingers. He can't speak, can't open his eyes. Then we find a way to change that. Woo-suk's jaw set with determination. There must be a reason he's trapped. Something medical that's being missed or deliberately ignored. If we can figure out what's blocking his recovery. The doctors have tried everything. Have they? Or have they only tried the obvious approaches while someone inside the hospital makes sure nothing works? Zainab felt a chill. You think someone is deliberately keeping him in that state? I think Jang needs Doojin alive but silent. A dead man triggers investigations, succession protocols, the reading of wills. A man in a permanent coma can be managed, controlled, used. His assets can be transferred, his decisions made by proxy, his empire dismantled piece by piece while he watches helplessly from behind closed eyes. The horror of it settled into Zainab's bones. We have to stop them. We will. Woo-suk's eyes met hers with fierce intensity. But first, we need to understand exactly what's been done to him. And for that, we need someone inside the medical team. Someone with access to his complete records. Someone Jang doesn't control. Dr. Kong, Zainab said immediately. The neurosurgeon. She seemed concerned. Like she knew something wasn't right but couldn't prove it. Can you get to her? Convince her to help? I can try. Then try. Because we're running out of time. Woo-suk pulled out his phone, showing her a news alert. The board is meeting in 3 days to vote on new leadership. If Jang secures control of the company, Doojin's organization loses its protection. His allies will scatter. His enemies will consolidate. And whoever tried to kill him will have won. 3 days. 3 days to save a man she barely knew. 3 days to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Korean power. 3 days to protect her nephew from dangers he didn't fully understand. Zainab took a deep breath. Tell me what you need me to do. Dr. Kang Hai-rin was not an easy woman to reach. Her schedule ran from dawn until past midnight, filled with surgeries, consultations, research, and the endless administrative tasks that came with being one of the nation's leading neurosurgeons. When she wasn't operating, she was reviewing cases. When she wasn't reviewing cases, she was teaching residents. When she wasn't teaching, she was sleeping. And even then, her phone stayed within arm's reach. Zainab finally caught her in the hospital cafeteria at 6:47 a.m., when the tables were nearly empty and the pre-dawn light turned everything gray. Dr. Kong? May I speak with you for a moment? The surgeon looked up from her tablet, her expression guarded. I remember you. The interpreter who got lost on the VIP floor. I wasn't lost. Zainab slid into the seat across from her. I went to see CO Doojin. Because my nephew told me he was awake. Dr. Kang's face went carefully neutral, the expression of someone who had learned not to react visibly to unexpected information. Your nephew is a child. Children sometimes misinterpret what they see. He didn't misinterpret. The man was tapping his fingers in patterns. He responded to questions. He spelled out words. Oh, danger. She paused. Jang. Something flickered in Dr. Kang's eyes, hope quickly suppressed. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, it would contradict every objective measure we've used to assess his condition. Maybe your measures aren't detecting the right things. Maybe. Dr. Kong leaned back, studying Zainab intently. Why are you telling me this? You could have gone to the police. The press. You could have made accusations and let the chaos sort itself out. Because I think you already suspected something was wrong. And because someone inside this hospital may be deliberately preventing his recovery. If I make accusations publicly, those people will know we're onto them. Mr. CO will become a liability instead of an asset. They'll find a way to make him disappear permanently. The surgeon was quiet for a long moment. What you're suggesting, she finally said, implies a criminal conspiracy involving medical professionals. That's a serious allegation. I know. You have no proof beyond the observations of a child. I have the observations of a child whose attention to detail exceeds most trained professionals. And I have my own eyes. I watched a supposedly comatose man spell out a warning with his fingers. I saw a tear fall from his eye. Whatever is happening to him, it's not natural. Dr. Kong removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, more urgent. 3 weeks ago, I requested additional testing for Mr. CO. A specific type of scan that measures neural connectivity in ways standard imaging cannot. My request was denied, not for medical reasons but for administrative ones. The forms disappeared. The specialists I contacted suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Someone blocked the testing. It appears so. She replaced her glasses, her expression hardening. I'm a doctor. My oath is to heal. If someone is preventing my patient from receiving proper care, if someone is keeping him trapped in his own body for reasons that have nothing to do with medicine, then I will find out. And I will not stop until he is free. Zainab felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. How can I help? Your nephew. The one who started all this. Dr. Kong pulled out her tablet, opening a scheduling app. Can you bring him back to the hospital? Without anyone knowing? Why? Because if he noticed something our instruments missed, I want to understand exactly what he saw. And I want him to see it again, this time while I'm monitoring every possible metric. She looked up. Can you do that? Tomorrow night after visiting hours end? Zainab hesitated. Bringing Tund back into danger went against every protective instinct she possessed. But leaving Seo Doo-jin trapped forever, allowing his enemies to win, felt equally impossible. I'll talk to him, she said finally. The choice has to be his. Dr. Kong nodded, something like respect flickering in her eyes. A good answer. I'll make the arrangements. Come to the staff entrance at 10 p.m. I'll meet you myself. You want me to go back? Tund sat on his bed, his sketchbook open to a drawing of the VIP room rendered in remarkable detail. The machines, the bed, the flowers, the motionless figure beneath white sheets. Only if you want to. Zainab sat beside him, choosing her words carefully. I won't make you. It might be dangerous. There are people who don't want Mr. Seo to wake up, and if they find out we're helping him, they might try to stop us. Yes. Tund was quiet for a moment, his small fingers tracing the outline of his drawing. When Papa had his accident, he said slowly, he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I was afraid to visit him. Afraid of all the machines and the smells and the way he looked when he was sleeping and couldn't talk to me. Zainab's chest tightened. She hadn't known he remembered that period. He had been only 5 years old. Mama made me go anyway, Tund continued. She said Papa needed to know we were there. Even if he couldn't hear us, we had to try. And you know what? What? The day I finally talked to him, really talked like he could understand, was the day he started getting better. The doctor said it was a coincidence. But I don't think it was. I think he heard me. I think my voice helped him find his way back. Tears slipped down Zainab's face. Mr. Seo is like Papa was, Tund said firmly. Trapped somewhere he can't get out of. And he needs someone to show him the way back. He looked up at her with those bright, intelligent eyes. I want to help him, Auntie. Not because I'm not scared, I am scared. But being scared doesn't mean you shouldn't do the right thing. It just means the right thing is harder. Zainab pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. You are going to change the world someday, she whispered. Maybe, he said into her shoulder. But first, let's save one person. Tomorrow night arrived with agonizing slowness. Zainab spent the day going through the motions of her normal routine. Meetings, translations, professional smiles that hid the terror coiling in her stomach. Every passing security guard seemed to look at her too long. Every closing door sounded like a cell locking. Tund, by contrast, spent the day preparing. He reviewed his notes on the finger patterns. He practiced decoding potential messages. He even researched locked-in syndrome, a condition where patients retain awareness while appearing completely unresponsive, and made a list of questions to help assess Mr. Seo's cognitive state. You're remarkably calm about all this, Zainab observed as they ate dinner. I'm not calm, Tund admitted. I'm focused. There's a difference. Panic doesn't help anyone. Focus does. By 10 p.m., they were standing at the staff entrance of Seoul Medical Center, the city's night skyline glittering behind them. Dr. Kong appeared moments later, her white coat exchanged for a dark jacket that made her harder to spot in the shadows. Follow me. Stay close. Don't speak unless necessary. They moved through service corridors and freight elevators, avoiding security checkpoints and camera sightlines. Dr. Kong had clearly done this before. Her movements were confident, practiced, the product of years navigating hospital politics in ways administrators didn't need to know about. When they finally reached room 4701, Han Woo-suk was waiting outside. Any problems? None yet. Dr. Kong unlocked the door with a keycard that definitely wasn't part of her standard access. Let's move quickly. The room was dark except for the soft glow of monitors. Seo Doo-jin lay motionless in his bed, a shadow of the powerful man he had once been. 3 months of unconsciousness had thinned his face, pale skin stretched across sharp cheekbones, his jet-black hair longer than it should be, brushing his shoulders. But Tund didn't focus on those details. He focused on the hands. Dr. Kong, he said softly, moving toward the bed, can you make the room completely quiet? Turn off anything that makes noise? The monitors are essential. Not turn off. Just mute. I need to be able to hear if he's trying to communicate. Dr. Kong hesitated, then nodded and began adjusting settings. The room fell silent except for the soft rhythm of breathing. Tund positioned himself beside the bed, his sketchbook and pencil ready. "Mr. Seo," he said clearly, "my name is Tund. I was here a few days ago. I saw your fingers moving. I understood that you were trying to tell us something. Nothing happened. I know you're in there," Tund continued, his voice gentle but certain. "I know you can hear me. And I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. My aunt is here. Dr. Kong is here. Mr. Han is here. We're all going to help you." Still nothing. Zainab felt doubt creeping in. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe Tund had misinterpreted what he'd seen. Maybe. A finger twitched. Just once. Just barely. But unmistakably. Tund leaned closer. "Can you do that again?" 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. 1 tap. "Perfect. That's perfect." Tund's face lit up with the joy of a problem being solved. "Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. Simple ones first, then we'll go deeper. Ready?" 1 tap. Dr. Kong had moved to the monitors, her eyes wide as she watched real-time data streams that were suddenly making sense in new ways. "The brain activity is spiking," she breathed. "He's not just responsive, he's fully conscious. The standard tests weren't calibrated to detect this kind of low-amplitude response. We were looking for signals too large while he was sending signals that were too small." "Can you hear everything that happens in this room?" Tund asked. 1 tap. "Can you understand Korean?" 1 tap. "Can you understand English?" 1 tap. "Can you move anything besides your fingers?" 2 taps. "No. But you're trying?" 1 tap. Tund glanced back at Zainab, his expression both triumphant and heartbroken. He's been trying to escape for 3 months. Trying to move, to speak, to open his eyes. But something is blocking him. It's like his body won't obey his brain. Dr. Kong moved closer, her medical mind racing. "Mr. Seo, I'm going to ask you some specific questions. Your answers may help us understand what's happening to you. Is that acceptable?" 1 tap. "Do you remember the accident?" 1 tap. "Do you believe it was intentional?" 1 tap. "Do you know who was responsible?" 1 tap. "Was it Jang Myung-soo?" A pause, longer than the others, waited with something that felt like rage. Then 1 firm, definitive tap. Woo-suk made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between vindication and grief. "I knew it. I knew it was him." "There's more," Tund said, studying the man's hands intently. "He's trying to spell something again." He watched the slow, deliberate movements of Doojin's finger against the sheet. D-R-U-G. "Drug," Zainab translated. "He's saying he was drugged." Dr. Kang's face went pale. If someone has been administering unauthorized substances, something to suppress consciousness, prevent awakening, it would explain everything. The abnormal brain patterns, the failed recovery timeline, the way his condition hasn't improved despite no obvious reason for decline. "Who has access to his 4-line?" Woo-suk demanded. "Too many people. Nurses, doctors, specialists, cleaning staff." Dr. Kang's voice caught. "Anyone with hospital access and the right timing could inject something without being noticed. Can you test for it?" "Not without knowing what to look for. There are hundreds of compounds that could cause these symptoms. We'd need to know the specific." Tund's voice cut through. "He's still spelling." They all turned to watch. "Nurse," Zainab whispered. "One of the nurses?" "K. Nurse Kim." Woo-suk pulled out his phone immediately. "I'll have background checks started within the hour. If there's a connection between Kim and Jang." "Wait." Dr. Kong raised a hand. "If we tip them off, they'll cover their tracks. We need to catch them in the act. That means surveillance, coordination, timing. And we need to keep Mr. Seo's awareness absolutely secret until we have evidence." "How long?" Zainab asked. "I don't know. Days maybe. The board meeting is in 2 days. If Jang secures control before we can prove what he's done, then we have 2 days." Woo-suk's voice was steel. 2 days to bring down the man who did this. 2 days to wake up the only person who can stop him. Tund had returned his attention to Doojin, watching those faint, desperate finger movements. "He's spelling something else," the boy said softly. Pause. What? Zainab's vision blurred with tears. "Thank you." A man who had spent 91 days trapped in silent darkness, unable to speak or move or cry for help, and his first full message was gratitude. She moved to the bedside, placing her hand gently over his motionless fingers. "We're going to get you out of this," she promised. "Whatever it takes." However long it takes. You're not alone anymore. Beneath her palm, his finger tapped once. I know. The next 48 hours were a blur of covert operations and barely contained terror. Woo-suk's investigation revealed that nurse Kim Soo-young had received 3 large deposits to an offshore account over the past 3 months, each one timed perfectly with the administration of Do-jin's maintenance medications. The payments traced back through a series of shell companies that ultimately connected to a subsidiary of Jang Myung-soo's personal holdings. Dr. Kang ran secret blood tests, comparing Do-jin's samples to his baseline records from before the accident. She found traces of a compound called Clotazepam-7, a highly restricted paralytic agent that suppressed voluntary muscle control while leaving consciousness intact. It was the perfect drug for someone who wanted a victim aware but helpless, able to hear his empire crumbling but unable to do anything about it. Meanwhile, Zainab and Tund maintained their cover, attending translations and meetings while secretly coordinating with the growing team of conspirators. Each night, they returned to room 4701, continuing their communication with Do-jin, mapping the extent of his awareness, building a relationship forged in whispered words and tapping fingers. He's getting stronger, Tund observed on the second night. The taps are clearer. More controlled. I think knowing we're here is helping him fight whatever the drug is doing. The compound's half-life is 12 hours, Dr. Kang explained. They've been dosing him every morning and evening. If we can interrupt the schedule, skip even one dose, his body might start clearing the drug on its own. Can we do that without alerting Nurse Kim? I've arranged for her to be pulled into an emergency surgery consultation tomorrow at 6 a.m. That should delay the morning dose by at least 4 hours. It's not much, but it might be enough. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. All they could do now was wait and pray. The morning of the board meeting dawned cold and gray over Seoul. In a conference room on the top floor of CO Tower, 12 men and women gathered around a polished table, their expensive suits and careful expressions masking the predatory anticipation beneath. CO Do-jin's chair sat empty at the head of the table, a symbolic reminder of the power vacuum they had gathered to fill. Jang Myung-soo stood by the window, his silver-black hair perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable, his black leather gloves adding a subtle menace to his polished appearance. He had spent months preparing for this moment, the formal vote that would transfer executive authority to him as interim CEO, pending Do-jin's miraculous recovery. A recovery everyone in this room knew would never come. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we've postponed this decision long enough. Our company's stock has fallen 12%. Our partners are seeking reassurance. Our competitors smell blood in the water. We cannot afford to wait any longer for a man who may never wake up. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. I therefore move that the board grant emergency executive powers to the position of interim chief executive officer, with full authority over all operational and financial decisions, effective immediately. Seconded, said a voice from across the room. Then we proceed to. The conference room doors burst open. Han Woo-suk strode in, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who moved with unmistakable military precision. Behind them came Dr. Kang Hai-rin, tablet in hand, and a young African woman with natural black curls and a child holding a worn sketchbook. Jang's expression flickered, just for a moment, before his composure returned. This is a private meeting. You have no authority here. I don't need authority, Woo-suk said coldly. I have evidence. He tossed a folder onto the conference table. Photographs spilled out, Nurse Kim meeting with one of Jang's associates. Bank records. Shipping manifest for Clotazepam-7. Phone logs linking Jang's personal line to the construction company responsible for the accident 3 months ago. The board members stared at the evidence, their faces cycling through shock, confusion, and dawning horror. What is the meaning of this? One of them demanded. The meaning, Dr. Kang said, stepping forward, is that Jang Myung-soo orchestrated an assassination attempt against CO Do-jin, then arranged for him to be chemically imprisoned in his own body while his empire was systematically dismantled. These are lies, Jang snarled. Fabrications by a disgruntled employee and a foreign activist with no standing. They're not lies. The voice came from the doorway. Every head in the room turned, and CO Do-jin walked in. He was unsteady, supported on one side by an orderly, his movements slow and careful, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. But his steel-gray eyes were open, blazing with cold fury, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the dangerous power it had always possessed. They're not lies, he repeated, each word precise and deliberate. I heard everything. Every conversation. Every plan. Every time you came to my room to gloat about what you were taking from me. He focused on Jang with lethal intensity. Did you think I couldn't hear you? Did you think I wasn't fighting every moment of every day to wake up and destroy you? Jang's face had gone white. This is impossible. The drugs. The drugs wore off. Doojin took another step forward, releasing the orderly's support, standing on his own through sheer force of will. Because the people you thought were insignificant, an interpreter, a child, a doctor who actually gave a damn, they figured out what you did. They fought for me when everyone else had given up. He was in front of Jang now, close enough to touch. You tried to take everything from me, Doojin said softly. My company. My organization. My life. But you forgot something important. What? Jang managed, his voice barely a whisper. Doojin smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't lose. Security burst through the doors behind them, not Jang's security but Doojin's, the loyal soldiers who had been waiting for this moment, who had never stopped believing their leader would return. Take him, Doojin commanded. And everyone else whose names appear in that file. The police can sort out the details. I want Jang alive and conscious when they explain exactly how long he'll be spending in prison. As guards moved to comply, Jang tried to run, but there was nowhere to go, and within seconds he was subdued, his black leather gloves twisted behind his back as handcuffs clicked into place. This isn't over, he spat. You have no proof that will hold up in court. I have my testimony, Doojin said calmly. 3 months of witnessed crimes, recorded by a consciousness no one knew was watching. Your own people will testify against you to save themselves. And by the time I'm finished, your name will be synonymous with betrayal. He turned away, dismissing Jang from his attention entirely. His gaze found Tund, who was watching the chaos with wide eyes, his sketchbook still clutched against his chest. Doojin walked toward him slowly, painfully, each step costing him energy he barely had. When he reached the boy, he lowered himself carefully to one knee, bringing himself to Tund's eye level. You saw me, he said quietly in English, when no one else did. You believed what your eyes told you, even when everyone said you were wrong. Tund nodded solemnly. I just looked. Really looked. That takes more courage than most adults ever find. Doojin placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture of respect between equals. You saved my life. I won't forget that. Whatever you need for the rest of your life, you have only to ask. Tund considered this with his usual gravity. Can I draw your portrait? I've been working on it from memory, but it would be better if you could sit still for a while. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the pain, the 3 months of horror he was only beginning to process, Seo Doojin laughed. It was a rusty sound, unfamiliar even to himself, but genuine. Yes, he said. I think I can manage that. In the weeks that followed, Seoul's power structure underwent a seismic shift. Jang Myung-soo and his associates were arrested, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, assault, fraud, and a dozen other crimes that would keep prosecutors busy for years. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the documents Woo-suk had gathered, but Doojin's own detailed testimony, recounting every conversation he had overheard, every plan discussed in his presence, every moment of calculated cruelty. The board voted unanimously to reinstate Doojin as CEO, though he surprised everyone by announcing a restructuring that would transition much of his underground operations toward legitimate business. I've had 3 months to think about what matters, he explained to the press. Power is meaningless if there's no one left who cares whether you live or die. Mrs. Park cried when he came home, great racking sobs that shook her entire body as she clutched him like the son she had never had. I knew you would come back, she kept saying. I never stopped knowing. Dr. Kang was offered a position as chief medical officer of a new foundation Doojin established. One dedicated to researching locked-in syndrome and other conditions where patients might be conscious but unable to communicate. She accepted without hesitation. Nurse Kim received a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony, though she would never work in medicine again. And Tund became an unlikely celebrity, the 8-year-old boy whose curiosity had toppled a criminal conspiracy. Reporters wanted interviews, publishers wanted book deals, schools wanted to give him awards. He turned them all down. I didn't do it for attention, he told his aunt. I did it because it was right. I don't need people clapping about it. Zainab had never been prouder of him. 3 months after the board meeting, Seo Doojin invited Zainab to dinner. Not at one of Seoul's exclusive restaurants, not at a corporate function, not at any of the glittering events where powerful people gathered to see and be seen. He invited her to his home, a traditional Korean estate on the outskirts of the city, with gardens that had been tended for generations and rooms that held more history than most museums. Mrs. Park served them personally, beaming as she watched the fearsome CEO fumble through conversation with the Nigerian woman who had helped save his life. "I've never been good at this," Doojin admitted, his steel-gray eyes unusually uncertain. "Communication. Vulnerability. The things that actually matter." "You communicated plenty while you were in a coma," Zainab pointed out. "That took incredible strength. That was survival. This is..." He paused, searching for words. "I don't know what this is. I only know that when I imagine my future now, you're in it. You and Tund. The people who saw me when I was most helpless and didn't look away." Zainab felt her heart skip, not with the instant attraction of romance novels, but with something deeper. Something that had been building slowly over months of whispered conversations, shared secrets, a bond forged in crisis and tempered in trust. "I'm not staying in Seoul forever," she said carefully. "My contract ends in 18 months. Tund will go back to his parents eventually. We have lives that don't fit neatly into your world." "I know." He reached across the table, his tattooed fingers, loyal fear, brushing against hers with unexpected gentleness. "I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking for a chance. To know you. To earn your trust. To see if what we started in that hospital room can become something more. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Zainab looked at him, really looked the way Tund had taught her to see. She saw the scars, visible and invisible. She saw the walls he had built around his heart, crumbling slowly after decades of reinforcement. She saw a man who had been given a second chance at life and was terrified of wasting it. She saw someone worth knowing. "One dinner at a time," she said finally. "No promises. No expectations. Just one dinner at a time." His smile was small but genuine, the smile of a man who had forgotten how to hope and was slowly remembering. "One dinner at a time," he agreed. "I can do that." The dinners became weekly, then bi-weekly, then somehow, without anyone quite noticing when it happened, an essential part of both their lives. They talked about everything and nothing: her childhood in Lagos, his complicated relationship with his late father, Tund's latest drawings, the challenges of rebuilding an organization on legal foundations. They argued about politics, agreed about food, disagreed about movies. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's silences, each other's fears. Tund, for his part, watched the slow-developing relationship with the satisfied expression of a chess master whose long game was finally paying off. "You planned this," Zainab accused him one evening. "You knew what would happen if we kept spending time together." "I didn't plan anything," Tund protested innocently. "I just noticed that Mr. CEO looked at you differently than he looked at everyone else. Even when he couldn't open his eyes, I could feel it in the way his fingers moved when you talked. That's very perceptive for an 8-year-old. I'm almost 9. She laughed and hugged him, this remarkable child who had somehow become the bridge between two worlds. A year passed. Jang Myung-soo's trial ended with a sentence of 25 years, most of which he would serve in a maximum security facility far from anyone who might help him escape. His empire crumbled, divided among competitors who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. CEO Doojin's company flourished under its new direction: legitimate investments, transparent dealings, a reputation that was slowly shifting from feared to respected. He still had enemies, still had the organization that answered to him in ways the public never needed to know, but the balance had shifted. Power without purpose had become power with principle. Mrs. Park announced her retirement. At 73, she said, she had earned the right to spend her days in the garden instead of polishing floors. Doojin gave her a cottage on the estate grounds and a pension that would keep her comfortable for 3 lifetimes. Tund returned to Lagos, to parents who had reconciled in a home that welcomed him back with open arms. But he called his aunt every week, and somehow those calls always seemed to happen when Doojin was nearby. "Just checking on my investments," Tund would say wisely, making both adults laugh. And Zainab's contract ended. She stood in her empty apartment, suitcases packed, passport ready, trying to understand why leaving felt so much harder than arriving. "You don't have to go." Doojin stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his steel-gray eyes holding the question he had been building toward for months. "My work here is finished. Then start new work. The foundation needs translators. International clinics need coordinators. There are 1,000 reasons to stay, and only one reason to leave." "What reason is that?" "Fear." He moved closer and she didn't step back. "I'm not afraid," she said. "Then prove it." His hands found hers, those tattooed fingers intertwining with her own. "Stay. Not because I'm asking, because you want to. Because somewhere in the past year, this stopped being my city and started being ours. That's not fair. Nothing about us has been fair from the beginning." A Nigerian interpreter and a Korean CEO who started their relationship in a Coma ward. That's not a love story that makes sense. Who said anything about love? His smile was slow, genuine, the expression of a man who had learned to feel again after decades of numbness. "I did. Just now. I love you, Zainab. I've loved you since you held my hand in that hospital room and promised me I wasn't alone. I'll love you whether you stay or go, whether this works or doesn't, whether the world understands us or not." She was crying now, not sad tears, not happy tears, something in between that didn't have a name. "My mother will say I've lost my mind. Your mother will say whatever mothers say. Then she'll meet me and realize I'm not going anywhere, and eventually she'll accept that her daughter has excellent taste. You're very confident. I spent 3 months trapped in darkness with nothing but my thoughts. I had time to figure out exactly what I wanted." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "What I want is you. Not as an obligation. Not as a transaction. Just as you are. For as long as you'll have me." Zainab looked at this man, this complicated, damaged, healing man who had clawed his way back from death because an 8-year-old boy believed in what he saw. She thought about everything they had survived, everything they had built, everything they might become. "One dinner at a time," she said softly. "That was the deal. And we've had a lot of dinners. Enough to make a decision? That depends." His eyes searched hers. "What's your decision?" She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and rested her head against his chest. Beneath her ear, his heart beat strong and steady, the heart that had nearly stopped 3 months into his coma, that had kept fighting because somewhere, somehow, hope had still existed. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Not forever, I'm not promising forever. But for now. For you. For whatever comes next." His arms wrapped around her, holding her like she was precious, like she was everything. "For now is more than enough," he said into her hair. "For now is more than I ever thought I'd have." Outside the window, Seoul glittered with a million lights, each one a story, each one a possibility. And somewhere in that vast and complicated city, a man who had been forgotten was finally beginning to be found. Batch 1 ends here. Cliffhanger **. In the shadows of the apartment hallway, a figure watched through a cracked door, a figure whose face was hidden but whose silhouette seemed terrifyingly familiar. A gloved hand raised a phone, capturing a photograph of Seo Doojin and Zainab in their embrace. A message was typed quickly. **, the woman is his weakness. The child is in Lagos. We can use both. **, Jang sends his regards from prison. The game isn't over. **. The phone screen displayed a reply almost instantly. Understood. Moving to phase 2. And in a maximum security cell half a continent away, Jang Myung-soo smiled at the coded message that had somehow reached him through guards who had been cheaper to buy than expected. "Did you really think," he whispered to no one, "that 25 years would stop me? Did you really think I'd let you win? The game wasn't over. It had only just begun." The photograph arrived at 3 separate locations within the hour. The first copy reached a nondescript office building in Busan, where men who had once answered to Jang Myung-soo now operated under new management. Management that had been carefully cultivated during the months of chaos following the CEO's awakening. They studied the image with professional detachment, calculating angles, vulnerabilities, opportunities. The second copy found its way to a private investigator in Lagos, a man whose moral flexibility had made him useful to powerful clients on multiple continents. His instructions were simple: locate the child, document his routines, identify points of access. No action yet, just information. The third copy was hand-delivered to a woman in Seoul whose face had never appeared in any investigation, whose name had never been mentioned in any testimony, whose connection to Jang Myung-soo ran deeper than business or ambition. She was his sister, twin actually, and she had spent the past year watching her brother's empire crumble while the man responsible rebuilt his life with infuriating serenity. Jang Minji looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman in Seo Doojin's arms was beautiful, she admitted. Strong-featured, warm-eyed, the kind of beauty that came from character rather than cosmetics. And the way Doojin held her, protective, tender, vulnerable, revealed something Minji had never seen in all her years of observing the fearsome Seo. He loved her. The great Seo Doo-jin, who had built his reputation on emotional detachment and ruthless calculation, had finally found something he couldn't bear to lose. Minji smiled. Her brother had failed because he had tried to destroy Doo-jin directly, attacking his body, his business, his power. But there were other ways to break a man. Subtler ways. Ways that left no evidence and offered no targets for retaliation. You didn't destroy Seo Doo-jin by attacking what he controlled. You destroyed him by taking what he loved. 6 months had passed since Zainab's decision to stay. 6 months of building something neither of them had expected. A relationship that defied every boundary of culture, background, and circumstance. They had found an apartment together in Hanamdong, a space that blended Korean minimalism with African warmth, where traditional calligraphy hung beside Yoruba textiles and the kitchen always smelled of either kimchi or jollof rice, depending on who had cooked last. Doo-jin's recovery continued steadily. The physical therapy had restored most of his strength, though he still tired more easily than before and occasionally experienced tremors in his hands that reminded him of those desperate months of finger-tapping communication. Dr. Kang monitored him monthly, adjusting treatments, ensuring no residual effects of the Ketazepam 7 remained in his system. The nightmares were harder to treat. He woke sometimes in the dark hours, gasping, convinced he was trapped again, conscious but paralyzed, screaming without sound while enemies dismantled everything he had built. On those nights, Zainab would hold him, speaking softly in a mixture of English and Yoruba, grounding him in the present until his breathing steadied and the terror faded. "You're safe," she would whisper. "You're here. You're free." And slowly, painfully he would believe her. Their relationship had evolved beyond the initial gratitude and attraction into something more complex. A partnership of equals who challenged each other, supported each other, and refused to let the other settle for less than their best. Doo-jin learned to express emotions he had suppressed for decades. Zainab learned to accept protection without feeling diminished by it. They fought about small things and compromised on large ones, building a foundation that neither had expected to find. Tund visited during school holidays, his presence filling the apartment with energy and questions and the constant scratch of pencil on paper. He had developed a particular interest in Korean art, blending traditional techniques with his own distinctive style, creating pieces that caught the attention of teachers and gallery owners alike. "He's remarkable," Doo-jin observed one evening watching the boy work on a portrait commission. Mrs. Park, seated in her cottage garden, rendered in meticulous detail. "The way he sees things. The way he translates observation into creation. He gets it from his grandmother," Zainab said. "She was an artist too before arthritis took her hands. She used to say that every person contains a universe, and art is the only language capable of expressing it. Wise woman. The wisest I've ever known. She died when Tun was 4, but I think part of her lives on in him. The way he looks at the world, really looks, that was her gift." Doo-jin was quiet for a moment, watching Tund add delicate shading to Mrs. Park's wrinkled hands. "I want to do something for him," he said finally. "Something meaningful. Not money or gifts but, I don't know. Something that acknowledges what he did. What he means. You already have. You treat him as an equal. You listen to him. You see him." Zainab smiled softly. For a child who has often felt overlooked, that matters more than any grand gesture. "Still. When he's older, when he's ready to pursue his art seriously, I want him to know that whatever resources he needs are available. Education, supplies, connections. Not as charity but as investment. Because I believe in what he can become." Zainab felt her heart swell with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You're a good man, Doo-jin." "I'm trying to be." His steel-gray eyes met hers. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually trying." The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later. Woo-suk appeared at their apartment unannounced, his expression grave in ways that made Zainab's stomach clench with premonitory dread. "We need to talk," he said to Doo-jin. "Privately." They retreated to the study, a room lined with books in 4 languages, where Doo-jin conducted business that required discretion. Zainab waited in the living room, trying to focus on her translation work but finding her attention constantly drawn to the closed door. When they emerged an hour later, Doo-jin's face had hardened into the mask she recognized from their earliest encounters, the expression of a man preparing for war. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting aside her laptop. Doo-jin exchanged a glance with Woo-suk, some silent communication passing between them. "Tell her," Doo-jin said finally. "She needs to know." Woo-suk nodded reluctantly. "We've intercepted communications suggesting that Jang Myung-soo has been directing operations from prison." Bribing guards, using coded messages, maintaining contact with loyalists we thought had scattered. That's not possible. He's in maximum security. Money buys access anywhere, Woo-suk said grimly. We've confirmed at least 3 guards on his payroll and a network of intermediaries passing instructions. The communications we've decoded suggest he's planning something. Something targeting you specifically. Me? Zainab's voice came out steadier than she felt. Why me? Because of what you mean to do, Jean. Woo-suk's eyes were apologetic. The messages reference the woman and the child. They're gathering information, mapping routines, identifying vulnerabilities. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Tund. Where is my nephew right now? Zainab demanded, her voice rising. Is he safe? Does his family know? We've already contacted authorities in Lagos, Dujin said quickly. Tun's parents have been informed of a potential threat. Private security has been arranged. He's being watched, protected. Without telling me? We confirmed the threat 40 minutes ago. I wanted to verify the information before causing unnecessary panic. Dujin's jaw tightened. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I'm trying to protect the people who matter to you. Zainab closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. Fear wouldn't help anyone. Panic wouldn't keep Tun safe. She needed to think clearly, act deliberately, respond rather than react. What do we do? She asked, opening her eyes. How do we stop this? We find whoever is coordinating on Jang's behalf, Woo-suk said. Cut off the head and the body dies. Our intelligence suggests there's someone in Seoul. Someone who's been operating in the shadows, someone Jang trusted enough to continue his work. Do you know who? Woo-suk hesitated. We have a suspicion. But no proof yet. Then get proof. Zainab's voice was steel. Whatever resources you need, whatever it takes. I will not let that monster touch my family. Dujin moved to her side, his hand finding hers with practiced ease. I failed to protect myself once, he said quietly. I won't fail to protect you. I swear it. She looked at him, this man who had survived the unsurvivable, who had clawed his way back from death, who had rebuilt himself into something better than he had been. Then let's end this, she said. Together. The investigation moved quickly once resources were properly deployed. Woo-suk's network of informants, combined with Dujin's considerable influence, began peeling back layers of the conspiracy like skin from an onion. Shell companies were traced. Communication patterns were analyzed. Known associates of Jang Myung-soo were placed under surveillance. The trail led eventually to a name no one had expected. Jang Minji. Twin sister, Woo-suk reported, spreading photographs across Dujin's desk. Born 7 minutes after Myung-soo. Educated in Switzerland, career in international finance, no criminal record. On paper she's completely legitimate. On paper, Dujin repeated flatly. Exactly. Off paper she's been managing her brother's hidden assets for over a decade. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the layers of obfuscation, all her work. She's brilliant, careful, and completely loyal to her brother. Zainab studied the photograph of Minji, a striking woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the same cold calculation as her twins. The family resemblance was undeniable, though Minji's features were softer, more feminine, easier to underestimate. She's been invisible this entire time, Zainab said. While everyone focused on Jang, she was building something in the shadows. And now she's ready to use it. Dujin's expression was grim. The question is how. Direct assault failed, she knows that. Whatever she's planning will be subtle. Indirect. Designed to cause maximum damage while leaving no evidence. The messages mentioned the child, Woo-suk reminded them. Tund is obviously a target. But there was something else, references to the past, and the truth. I couldn't decode the full meaning. Zainab felt ice forming in her stomach. The past. The truth. What truth could Minji possibly use against them? We need to find her, Dujin said decisively. Bring her in for questioning before she can execute whatever she's planning. That's the problem. Woo-suk's jaw tightened. She disappeared 3 days ago. Left her apartment, withdrew cash, abandoned all traceable assets. She could be anywhere. Then we find her. Every contact, every property, every connection. Someone knows where she is. I have people working on it. But Dujin, Woo-suk hesitated. There's something else. Something I didn't want to mention until I was certain. What? The private investigator in Lagos. The one gathering information on Tund. He was found this morning. Pause. Dead. Made to look like a robbery, but my contacts say it was professional. Clean. The room went silent. She's cleaning up loose ends, Zainab said slowly. Removing anyone who could connect her to the conspiracy. Which means she's close to acting, Doojin finished. Whatever she's planning, it's happening soon. As if summoned by the words, Doojin's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered cautiously, putting it on speaker. Mr. Seo. The voice was feminine, controlled, with a trace of accent that suggested international education. I believe we have mutual interests to discuss. Minji. You've done your research. It will save time. What do you want? The same thing you want. Resolution. Closure. An end to the conflict that has cost both our families too much already. Your brother tried to kill me. My brother was overly ambitious and insufficiently patient. His methods were crude. I prefer elegance. Doojin's eyes met Zainab's across the room. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Keep her talking. What kind of elegance did you have in mind? A meeting. Neutral territory. You and the woman alone. No guards, no weapons, no surveillance. We discuss terms, reach an agreement, and move forward without further bloodshed. And if I refuse? The soft laugh. You won't refuse. Because I have something you want. Information about a threat you haven't anticipated. And because if you refuse, the child in Lagos becomes very easy to reach. Your security is good, but it's not infinite. Zainab's hands clenched into fists. When? Doojin asked, his voice betraying nothing. Tomorrow night. I'll send coordinates. Come alone or don't come at all. Pause. Oh, and Mr. Seo? Whatever plan you're forming right now, whatever strategy you think will let you ambush me or capture me or eliminate the threat I represent, abandon it. I've spent a year preparing for this moment. You haven't. The line went dead. Silence stretched through the room like a held breath. It's a trap, Woo-suk said immediately. She wants you isolated, vulnerable. She'll have backup even if she claims otherwise. Obviously. Doojin's mind was already racing through possibilities. But she also has leverage. If we refuse, she may follow through on her threat against Tund. We increase security. Move him to a safe location. Zainab's blood ran cold. Lies, Doojin said, but his voice wavered. Some of it, perhaps. But not all. Minji's smile was triumphant. The man you love, Ms. Adeyemi, is a monster. He's done things that would send ordinary men to prison for life. The fact that he was temporarily victimized doesn't erase the victims he created. I've changed, Doojin began. Have you? Or have you just found someone naive enough to believe you have? The words hung in the air like poison. Zainab looked at Doojin, at the man she had saved, the man she had fallen in love with, the man whose hands now trembled slightly as accusations he couldn't fully deny piled up around him. Is it true? She asked quietly. Any of it? He closed his eyes. Some of it. Not all. Not the way she's describing it. But. A ragged breath. I wasn't a good man, Zainab. Before. I did things I can't take back. Things I've tried to make up for, but the dead stay dead, Minji finished. The victims don't get second chances. Only the powerful do. Silence stretched between them. Then Zainab turned to face Minji directly. You think this changes something, she said. You think revealing his past will break what we have. But you don't understand what love actually is. Enlighten me. Love isn't pretending someone is perfect. It's accepting who they are, including who they were, and believing they can become better. Her voice strengthened. I knew Seo Doojin was dangerous when I met him. I knew his world was filled with violence and darkness. I chose to stay anyway because I saw something worth saving. A touching sentiment. But sentiment doesn't bring back the dead. No, it doesn't. Zainab stepped closer to Minji, close enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in the other woman's eyes. Nothing can bring back the dead. Not revenge. Not justice. Not even love. All we can do is choose what happens next. She glanced at Doojin, then back at Minji. Your brother made choices that led him to prison. Doojin made choices that nearly led him to a grave. Now you're making choices that will determine the rest of your life. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. You can pursue revenge until it consumes you completely. Or you can let go. Walk away. Choose to live instead of choosing to destroy. You think I can just walk away? After everything? I think you can do anything you choose to do. That's the only real power any of us has. Minji stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind her cold eyes. Then she laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. A beautiful speech. But you're forgetting something. She pulled a phone from her pocket, pressing a single button. I didn't come here to be convinced. I came here to end this. The factory lights blazed to life. Figures emerged from the shadows. A dozen men, armed, moving with military precision to surround them. Not the theatrical minions of fiction but professionals. Experienced. Dangerous. You thought you were walking into a negotiation, Minji said. You were walking into an execution. Doojin moved immediately, putting himself between Zainab and the nearest threat. Woosuk will be here in minutes. Woosuk's team was intercepted 5 minutes ago. They're alive for now but effectively neutralized. Minji's smile returned, colder than before. I told you I've been preparing for a year. Did you think I was exaggerating? The men moved closer, tightening the circle. Doojin's mind raced through options, finding none. He had survived 3 months of paralysis through sheer will, but couldn't stop bullets. If Minji gave the order. Wait. The voice came from the factory entrance. Everyone turned. Tund walked into the pool of light, his small figure impossibly calm, his worn sketchbook clutched against his chest as always. What? Zainab's voice cracked. Tund, how are you here? You're supposed to be in Lagos. I came back yesterday. His bright eyes were fixed on Minji. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. So I asked Mr. Woosuk to bring me. The security team was supposed to stop any unauthorized approaches. I'm 8 years old. I'm good at sneaking. The ghost of a smile crossed his face before vanishing. Also, Mr. Woosuk's team isn't as neutralized as you think. They're outside right now waiting. Minji's composure flickered. Impossible. My people confirmed. Your people confirmed what we wanted them to confirm. The voice was Woosuk's, coming through speakers that crackled to life throughout the factory. We've had surveillance drones tracking your operation for 48 hours. Your men outside are already in custody. Police are en route. The armed figures hesitated, looking to Minji for guidance. Her face twisted with rage. Then I'll finish this myself. She pulled a gun from her coat, raising it toward Doojin. Tun moved. Not toward Minji but toward Doojin and Zainab, his small body interposing itself between the weapon and the people he loved. No! Zainab screamed. But Tun didn't flinch. You won't shoot me, he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. I know you won't. Because I've seen you too. The way you looked when you talked about your brother. The way your voice shook when you said twin. You don't know anything about me. I know you're hurting. I know you lost someone you loved. I know you think hurting someone else will make that feeling go away. Tun's eyes, those remarkable perceptive eyes, met hers without wavering. But it won't. It never does. I learned that when my grandmother died. I was so angry, at the doctors, at God, at everyone. I wanted to break things. I wanted to make the world feel as bad as I felt. This isn't. But then my grandmother came to me in a dream. And she said that grief is love with nowhere to go. And the only way to survive it is to find somewhere new to put the love. Something that grows instead of destroys. Minji's gun hand trembled. He's in prison because of what he did, Tun continued. Not because of Mr. Seo. Your brother made choices. Bad choices. And you've been making bad choices too because grief told you there was no other way. But there is. There's always another way. The gun wavered. Please, Tun said softly. Put it down. Let this end. Choose to live instead of choosing to destroy. For a long, terrible moment, nothing moved. Then Minji's arm dropped. The gun clattered to the concrete floor. And she crumpled to her knees, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half scream. The release of a year's worth of grief and rage finally finding expression. Police flooded the building within seconds, securing the armed men, taking Minji into custody with more gentleness than she probably deserved. Woosuk appeared from somewhere, organizing, commanding, ensuring the chaos resolved into order. But Zainab saw none of it. She was on her knees, holding Tun so tightly that neither of them could breathe properly, tears streaming down her face as she thanked God and her ancestors and every force in the universe for protecting this impossible, remarkable child. You could have died, she managed. You could have. I knew she wouldn't shoot, Tun said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't a monster. She was just lost. Doojin knelt beside them, his own eyes suspiciously bright. You saved us, he said quietly. Again. Tund pulled back enough to look at both of them seriously. That's what family does, he said. We save each other. And somehow, in the middle of an abandoned factory surrounded by police and criminals and chaos, those words made everything make sense. Family. Not bound by blood but by choice. By love. By the willingness to stand between someone you cared about and whatever threatened them. They had become a family without realizing it. The feared CEO, the Nigerian interpreter, the 8-year-old artist. 3 people from completely different worlds who had somehow found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. Let's go home, Zainab said finally, rising to her feet and pulling Tund with her. Doojin nodded, one arm wrapping around her waist while the other hand rested on Tund's shoulder. Home, he agreed. And together, they walked out of the shadows into the waiting dawn. 1 year later. The gallery was full to overflowing. Seoul's artistic elite had gathered for the opening exhibition of a show that had been generating buzz for months, not because of any established master, but because of its remarkable source. Through different eyes, a child's vision of 2 worlds had become the most anticipated cultural event of the season, featuring works by an artist who would turn 10 next week. Tund moved through the crowd with surprising ease, answering questions about technique and inspiration, explaining the meaning behind pieces that blended Korean traditional forms with African storytelling traditions. He wore a small tailored suit that Mrs. Park had helped select, his round glasses slightly askew as always, his sketchbook replaced by a dignified exhibition program. He's going to be famous, Woo-suk observed, standing beside Doojin near the bar. Properly famous. The kind of famous that means something. He already means something. Doojin watched the boy navigate a conversation with a museum curator who clearly hadn't expected such articulate responses from someone under 5 feet tall. He's known it all along. The rest of the world is just catching up. Across the room, Zainab was deep in discussion with a delegation from the Nigerian embassy, explaining the cultural context of pieces that depicted Yoruba mythology rendered in Korean ink wash, or Korean landscapes populated with African wildlife. She had become an unexpected bridge between artistic communities, her language skills and cultural fluency making her invaluable to institutions trying to understand this new cross-cultural phenomenon. She caught Doojin's eye and smiled, the warm, genuine smile that still made his heart skip after all this time. You're staring again, Woo-suk observed dryly. I'm appreciating. You've been appreciating, for 2 years. When are you going to do something about it? Doojin reached into his pocket, where a small velvet box had been waiting for 3 weeks. Tonight, he said. After the exhibition closes. Woo-suk's eyebrows rose. Does she know? Tund helped me plan it. So probably. Doojin's lips quirked. He's not good at keeping secrets when he's excited. The boy who faced down an armed woman without flinching can't keep an engagement secret? Everyone has limitations. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration unfold. 1 year since the factory confrontation. 2 years since Tund first wandered into room 4701. An entire lifetime since Seo Doojin had been the man his enemies remembered, cold, calculating, alone. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't sure who he was becoming, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever he was, he wouldn't be that person without the woman across the room and the boy currently explaining brush technique to an increasingly impressed art professor. She'll say yes, Woo-suk said quietly. You know that, right? I know. Doojin's voice was soft. I know. The garden of the Seo estate had been transformed. String lights wove through ancient trees. Traditional Korean lanterns alternated with Nigerian kerosene lamps along meandering paths. The scent of jasmine mixed with hibiscus, 2 cultures literally blooming side by side. Tund had designed the layout himself, consulting old photographs from both Korea and Nigeria, creating a space that belonged to neither world entirely while honoring both equally. It's beautiful, Zainab breathed, taking in the scene as Doojin led her through the garden gate. How did you? Tund helped. Doojin guided her toward a small clearing where a single chair had been placed beneath a canopy of lights. He said that important moments should happen in important places. And since we couldn't fit a hospital room, a hostel factory, and a public gallery into one location. You built this. We built this. All of us. She turned to face him, her hazel brown eyes reflecting the warm glow of 100 lights. Doojin. What's happening? He took her hands in his, those tattooed fingers she had held so many times, that she had watched tap desperate messages in a coma ward, that had learned to be gentle because she had shown him how. 2 years ago, he said slowly, I was lying in a hospital bed, trapped in my own body, convinced I would die alone and unmourned. Everything I had built was being taken from me. Everyone I had trusted had either abandoned me or betrayed me. I had no hope, no future, no reason to keep fighting. Doojin, let me finish. He squeezed her hands gently. Then a child walked into my room. A child who saw what no one else could see, not because his eyes were better but because he actually looked. And because he looked, he found his aunt. And because his aunt listened, she found me. His voice roughened. You saved my life, Zainab. Not just my body, my soul. You showed me that the person I had been didn't have to be the person I would always be. You taught me that strength and gentleness could coexist. You loved me when I didn't know how to love you back. He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing the velvet box. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've hurt people. I've broken things that couldn't be repaired. I can't undo any of that. But I can choose what happens next. He opened the box. Inside, a ring glittered, a simple band of white gold supporting a stone that seemed to shift between colors as the light touched it. I found it in a market in Lagos last month, he said softly. The vendor said it was called an opal, a stone that contains multitudes that changes depending on how you look at it. It reminded me of us. Of how we see each other differently than the world sees us. Of how love can transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. He met her eyes. Marry me. Not because you owe me anything or because I need you to complete me, but because we're better together than we are apart. Because I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to deserve you. Because I love you, Zainab Adeyemi, and I want the world to know it. The garden was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the city's endless pulse. Then Zainab laughed, a bright, joyful sound that scattered the tension and filled the clearing with warmth. You practiced that speech, she accused. Tund helped. Of course he did. She pulled him closer by his jacket lapels. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to spend my life with you. Yes, I love you too, even though you're impossible and complicated and your organization still scares me sometimes. Her voice softened. Yes, Doojin. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her. Not the restrained kisses they had shared in public, the careful expressions of affection that respected boundaries and expectations. This was something deeper, something that communicated everything words couldn't capture. Gratitude and desire and commitment and hope all tangled together into a single moment of perfect connection. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, a small voice spoke from the shadows. Finally. Tund emerged from behind a decorative shrub, his sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the scene he had been capturing. You were supposed to stay inside, Doojin said, but he was smiling. I couldn't miss this. I've been planning it for months. Zainab laughed again, reaching out to pull her nephew into a three-way embrace that would have seemed impossibly strange 2 years ago. A Nigerian woman, a Korean CEO, and a child who had somehow become the bridge between their worlds. We're going to be a real family now, Tund said seriously. An official one. We've been a real family for a long time, Zainab replied. This just makes it legal. Will there be cake at the wedding? There will be so much cake. Both kinds? Korean and Nigerian? As many kinds as you want. Tund considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. Good, he said. A wedding should celebrate everything you are. And we're a lot of things. Doojin looked at the boy, this remarkable child who had seen him at his most helpless and had refused to look away. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. You already thanked me. I'll thank you every day for the rest of my life. It won't ever be enough. Tund's serious expression softened into something that looked almost like wisdom. Then just keep being the person you're becoming, he said. That's thanks enough. Above them the lights glittered like captured stars. Around them 2 cultures bloomed in perfect harmony. Between them bonds that had been forged in crisis had become something permanent, something beautiful, something that would endure. And somewhere in the distance the city of Seoul pulsed with life and noise and chaos. But here in this garden, there was only peace. The wedding, when it came, was everything a wedding should be. It happened 6 months later, in a venue that had required considerable negotiation. A traditional Korean hanok complex that had been adapted to include spaces for Nigerian ceremonies, so that both families could celebrate in ways that honored their heritage. Zainab's mother had flown in from Lagos with 17 relatives and enough food to feed an army. Doojin's surviving family members, few as they were, had arrived with formal gifts and barely concealed shock at the transformation they saw in the man they remembered as cold and unreachable. Mrs. Park had outdone herself, coordinating between cultures with a diplomat's skill, ensuring that no one felt overlooked or disrespected. Woo-suk had handled security with his usual efficiency, though the biggest threat he faced was an argument between two grandmothers about the proper way to prepare rice. Dr. Kang attended as an honored guest, watching the man she had helped save exchange vows with the woman who had believed in his recovery. And Tun stood beside them both, not as ring-bearer or flower child, but as witness, the only witness who had been present from the very beginning, who had seen everything unfold and understood what it meant. The ceremony blended traditions with careful precision. Korean bowing rituals gave way to Nigerian libation prayers. Hanbok silks complemented Aso oak fabrics. Languages wove together as vows were spoken in Korean, English, and Yoruba, each version carrying slightly different nuances that somehow made the whole more beautiful. When Doojin lifted Zainab's veil and looked into her eyes, he saw reflected there everything they had survived together. The hospital room where they had first met. The terrifying days of investigation and conspiracy. The factory confrontation that had nearly ended everything. And the 2 years of healing, growing, becoming, that had brought them to this moment. "I wasn't afraid to walk into a room full of armed enemies," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "But I'm terrified right now." "Why?" "Because this is real. This matters. This isn't something I can strategize or manipulate or control. This is just us." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "That's exactly why it's right," she said. "Because it's just us. It's always been just us." He kissed her, properly this time, in front of both families and hundreds of guests and a boy with a sketchbook who was absolutely not crying. "Thank you very much." The crowd erupted in cheers. And in that moment, Seo Doojin finally understood what he had been searching for his entire life. Not power. Not control. Not the fear and respect of those around him. Connection. Family. Love. The reception lasted until the small hours of the morning. Doojin danced with Zainab's mother and tried desperately to keep up with rhythms his body had never learned. Zainab was swept into group dances by relatives she hadn't seen in years, her laughter ringing across the celebration. Tun circulated through the crowd, sketching candid moments that guests would treasure for decades. At some point near midnight, Dr. Kang found Doojin alone by the refreshment table, catching his breath between dances. "You look happy," she observed. "I am happy." He said it like a confession. "I didn't know I could be." The brain is remarkable. It can heal from almost anything if given the right circumstances. She smiled. "You found the right circumstances. I had help. We all need help. The trick is being willing to accept it." She studied him for a moment. "Do you remember anything from those 3 months? Any impressions, any awareness?" "Fragments. Mostly emotions." He was quiet for a moment. "I remember being afraid. I remember rage. I remember the moment hope died and the moment it came back." "What brought it back?" "A child's voice." His eyes found Tund across the room. "Saying the thing no one else would say. Believing the thing no one else would believe." Dr. Kang followed his gaze. "He's extraordinary," she said. "What he did, recognizing signs that trained professionals missed, believing in his own perception when adults dismissed him. I've never seen anything like it. He sees the world differently. He pays attention to what matters instead of what's obvious. He saved your life. He saved all our lives." Doojin turned back to face her. "I've set up a foundation in his name. Educational resources, artistic training, opportunities he might not otherwise have access to. Not charity, investment. Because I believe in what he's going to become." "Does he know?" "Zainab will tell him tomorrow. As a wedding gift." Dr. Kang raised her glass. "To unexpected heroes," she said. "To everyone who believed when believing seemed impossible." They drank together, watching the celebration swirl around them. And somewhere in the crowd, Tund looked up from his sketchbook and caught Doojin's eye across the distance. He smiled, that serious, knowing smile that had been the first sign of hope in those dark hospital days. Doojin smiled back. Some debts could never be repaid. Some bonds could never be adequately explained. But they could be honored. And he would spend the rest of his life doing exactly that. 5 years later. The art studio took up an entire floor of the Seo Foundation building, a space designed specifically for the creative development of young artists from around the world. It was Tun's domain now, at least during summer breaks when he wasn't studying at the prestigious academy that had recruited him based on his growing reputation. At 13, he had already been featured in exhibitions across Asia and Africa. Critics called him a prodigy, a visionary, a bridge between cultures. He accepted the praise with characteristic gravity, never letting success change the fundamental quality that had made him special in the first place. He still looked really looked. While everyone else saw surfaces, he saw depths. Uncle Doojin? The title had come naturally over the years, a recognition of what they had become to each other. Can I ask you something? Doojin looked up from the financial reports he had been reviewing. At 43, he had aged into his authority, the steel-gray eyes now framed by lines that spoke of experience rather than coldness. The tattoos still marked his skin, but they had faded somewhat, just as the man who had earned them had transformed into something different. Always. When you were in the hospital before I found you, Tund hesitated. What did you think about? During all those months in the dark. It was a question Doojin had avoided for years. Even with Zainab, he rarely spoke about those endless days of conscious paralysis, the horror of witnessing his own destruction while unable to act. But Tund had earned the truth. He had earned everything. I thought about regret, Doojin said slowly. All the things I had done wrong. All the people I had hurt. All the choices I wished I could take back. That sounds terrible. It was. But it was also necessary. He set aside the reports. If I hadn't had that time to reflect, I might have woken up and continued being the same person who had created so many enemies. The darkness forced me to see myself clearly, not the image I projected but who I really was. And who were you? Broken. Angry. Afraid. Doojin met the boy's eyes directly. I had built walls around myself so thick that no one could reach me. I thought that made me strong. But all it really made me was alone. Tund absorbed this with his usual seriousness. Do you still feel broken? Sometimes. But I have people who help me put the pieces back together. He smiled softly. Your aunt. Yes. Mrs. Park. The family we've built. They remind me that I'm not alone anymore. That I never have to be alone again. That's what I'm going to paint, Tund said suddenly. For my next exhibition. Not just people, but the connections between them. The invisible threads that hold families together. That sounds beautiful. It's what I've been seeing for years. The way you look at Auntie. The way she looks at you. The way everyone looks at each other when they think no one is watching. His eyes sparkled with artistic vision. Love is visible if you know how to look. I'm going to show people how to look. Doojin felt a swell of emotion he couldn't quite name. You're going to change the world, he said. You know that, right? Maybe. Tund shrugged with teenage casualness that didn't quite hide his pleasure. But first, I need to finish this piece for Andy's birthday. She thinks I'm making her a portrait, but I'm actually making something bigger. What? A family tree. Not the traditional kind, not blood and names and dates. A real family tree showing everyone who's become connected through love instead of biology. His smile turned mischievous. It's going to take up an entire wall. She'll cry. That's the point. Tund returned to his canvas. Happy tears are the best kind. Doojin watched him work for a moment. This child who had grown into a remarkable young man, who had never lost the gift that had saved them all. Then he went to find his wife. Zainab was in the garden, supervising the latest expansion to the cultural center they had built together. A place where Korean and African traditions could meet, where young people could learn about both worlds, where the bridge Tund had first built could be crossed by thousands more. She looked up as Doojin approached, her face lighting with a smile that still made his heart skip after 5 years of marriage. You have that expression, she said. The one that means Tund said something that made you emotional. He's working on your birthday present. I know. He's been hiding canvases for weeks. She reached for his hand as he joined her. Let me guess, it's something to do with family? How did you know? Because that's what he thinks about. Connections. Relationships. The invisible threads that bind people together. She squeezed his fingers. He gets it from his grandmother. And maybe a little from watching us. They stood in comfortable silence, watching workers plant new sections of the garden. Cherry trees beside baobabs. Korean roses beside African lilies. Cultures intertwining like branches reaching for the same sun. Do you ever regret it? Doojin asked suddenly. Staying? Everything that came after? The kidnapping attempts? The constant security? The way your enemies became my enemies? She pretended to consider. Let me think. Zainab. No. She turned to face him fully. I don't regret a single moment. I don't regret walking into your hospital room. I don't regret believing Tund when no one else would. I don't regret falling in love with a man the world told me was dangerous. Even knowing what I was. What I did. Especially knowing that. Her eyes were warm with certainty. Because it means the change is real. The person you've become isn't a mask, it's who you actually are now. Who we helped you become. She touched his face gently. You were a man who was feared. Now you're a man who is loved. That transformation is worth more than any regret. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. I don't deserve you. You absolutely don't. He could hear the smile in her voice. Lucky for you, love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up. Day after day. Choosing each other even when it's hard. Even when it's hard, he agreed. They held each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Around them, the garden bloomed with the evidence of everything they had built, not just structures but relationships. Not just institutions but family. And somewhere in the studio above them, Tund continued painting his masterpiece, capturing on canvas what his remarkable eyes had always been able to see. Love made visible. Connection given form. The invisible threads that bound three people from three different worlds into something stronger than any of them could have been alone. The exhibition opened on Zainab's 35th birthday. Tund's family tree took up an entire wall of the CO Foundation Gallery, a massive work that defied easy categorization, blending techniques from multiple traditions into something entirely new. At its center were three figures, a tall Korean man, a Nigerian woman, and a young boy between them. They were rendered not as static portraits, but as living energy, light and color flowing between them, connecting them, making them parts of a larger whole. Branching out from this center were dozens of other figures. Woo-suk, steady and loyal. Mrs. Park, warm and constant. Dr. Kong, precise and caring. Zainab's mother and aunts. The workers at the foundation. The children from the cultural programs. Every person who had become part of their extended family, rendered with such love and attention that viewers often found themselves crying without understanding why. And at the base of the tree, small but unmistakable, was a hospital bed. A single figure lying motionless. And a small boy holding a sketchbook, looking at what no one else could see. The beginning of everything. Zainab stood before the piece, tears streaming freely, unable to speak. Doojin held her hand. Tund watched them both with the satisfied expression of an artist whose work had achieved its purpose. Happy birthday, Auntie, he said. She pulled him into a hug that lasted a very long time. Around them, guests admired the exhibition, the reviews accumulated praise, the critical acclaim began its predictable trajectory. But none of that mattered to the three people at the center of it all. They had everything they needed. They had each other. That night, after the guests had gone and the gallery was quiet, Tund found Doojin on the rooftop, looking out at the Seoul skyline. Thank you, Doojin said without turning. For the painting? For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For bringing your aunt into my life and giving me a family I never thought I'd have. Tund came to stand beside him. You would have woken up eventually, the boy said. The drugs weren't perfect. Someone would have noticed. Maybe. But by then my enemies would have won. My company would be gone. My organization would be scattered. I would have woken up to nothing. You would have still been alive. Being alive isn't the same as living. Doojin finally turned to look at him. You taught me that. An 8-year-old boy taught a crime boss the difference between existing and actually being alive. Tund smiled, that serious, knowing smile he had inherited from his grandmother. I just looked, he said. The same thing I've always done. The same thing I'll always do. Then keep looking. Doojin placed a hand on his shoulder. The world needs people who see what others miss. Who believe in impossible things. Who refuse to accept what everyone else has given up on. Is that my purpose? To look? Your purpose is whatever you choose it to be. But your gift, your extraordinary, impossible gift, is seeing. And using that gift to help people. His voice softened. You helped me. You helped your aunt. Now help whoever else needs it. There are more people trapped in darkness than anyone realizes. More people waiting for someone to notice them. Tund considered this with the gravity he brought to all important matters. I will, he said finally. I'll look for people the way I looked for you. I'll find them in the shadows and help them find their way out. That's all any of us can do. They stood together on the rooftop, man and boy, two people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely of circumstances and had been transformed by the collision. Below them the city pulsed with life. Millions of stories happening simultaneously, millions of moments of joy and sorrow and fear and hope. And somewhere in that vast tapestry, three threads had woven together so tightly that they could never be separated. A forgotten CEO who had spent 3 months in a coma. An interpreter who had listened when others wouldn't. And an 8-year-old boy who had uncovered the truth everyone else had overlooked. Their story had begun in a hospital room, surrounded by machines and silence and despair. It had continued through danger and conspiracy and near-death experiences. It had transformed into love, family, purpose, redemption. And it would continue, Doojin realized, for as long as they chose to let it. That was the real miracle. Not that they had survived, though they had. Not that they had fallen in love, though they had. Not even that they had built something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. The real miracle was that they had chosen each other. Again and again, through fear and doubt and impossible odds, they had chosen each other. And they would keep choosing. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Until the end of everything. And maybe even beyond.